kind of went over a little bit. I'm Derek, this is Ryan, and we run a YouTube channel called Badgerland Birding. We teach people about birds and the adventure of birding. And we've been birding in Wisconsin now for 10 years. So we feel like we have a good idea of the birding community there and kind of what's going on in the state. How many of you guys have gone bird in Wisconsin before? So a decent amount. It's nice, there's no tolls up there, so we'll bias. So first of all, we're going to go through kind of an overview of our got started in birding. And then we're going to go through some general info about Wisconsin, some signature species you can see in the state, some top locations to visit, then some of the birding festivals, some of the birding controversies that have gone on in our state. And I know some of them kind of happen in your state too. And then some rare birds that have visited the Badger State.
Yeah, so we'll kind of talk about how we got started first. So we always address what is birding, the observation of birds in their natural habitats as a hobby. And there are obviously tons of different types of birding, which is very appealing to everybody. And we, I think, at some point have done all of these pretty much. But let's talk a little bit about how we got started. Who here has watched a Badgerland birding video on YouTube before? That was not as many as who said they visited Wisconsin, which is just so we started birding because when we were little, we loved nature. So, you know, fish, snakes, turtles, all of that stuff. And we also love birds. So we would be at our grandparents' house watching the birds. And then we would see some specific ones that piqued our interest. So one was red-breasted nuthatch. Whenever the red-breasted nuthatch came by, that was a big deal for us. So we started noticing them early. And then there was a movie that came out called The Big Year, which I'm sure most people are familiar with in here. Is that going? No.
Yep.
Oh, there it is. So The Big Year came out, and a few years after that, we were just hanging out at our parents' house, and from the other room, our mom was like, "There's some movie about birds on. You want to watch it?" And we were like, "Yeah, DVR it." So then we watched The Big Year, and it of course has Jack Black, Owen Wilson, Steve Martin in it, so it's not just some rinky-dink film, and it looked so fun because they were going to all these crazy places. They're at a landfill. You don't know what's going on. They're on boats, trying to find basically a rare bird at every turn. So we saw that and decided that that looked really, really entertaining to do. And do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we kind of decided on a whim we were gonna try to do like a big year in Wisconsin, because we were like, oh, people actually do this, like that looks fun. So we got like the bird guide out. We're like, oh, these cool species like are here in winter, like, oh, red poles, crossbills. So we went out to like the forest in Waukesha, and it was like the dead of winter, and we're like, there's nothing out here. So we kind of just like thought that because the field guide said it was like in our area in winter that it would be there, and that kind of taught us a lot about habitat, you know, specifics for those species, and just kind of like how it was a little more of a challenge to find these certain birds. And I feel like that really made it fun for us. So the first year when we kind of went out and had no idea what we were doing, I think really like set us up for success of learning and just getting excited about birds and birding.
Well, even before that, we were thinking, you know, big year, because we were like in our 20s. I think he was in his teens. I was early 20s. We were competitive, you know, we're like, we can probably go out and see more birds than anyone's seen in Wisconsin before. I'm like, what? It's got to be like, you know, 50, 60 species tops. So I reached out to the Wisconsin Society of Ornithology, and they came back with a number that was like 375. And I was like, oh, probably not going to win the big year this year.
Yeah, so it turns out there's actually, you know, quite a big birding community. We'll talk kind of about how it's grown over time a little bit later. But let's get into some general information about Wisconsin. So we have a lot of cool different regions. Here's kind of some topography of the state. So Wisconsin is known as the Badger State. Some people from other regions don't know that that's kind of why we call ourselves Badgerland Birding, being from the Badger State. Now we've kind of expanded into going to other places. But we have some really awesome boreal forest habitat in the north. So we actually get some of the species you would see in an area like the Saxon Bog, but they can be a lot harder to find. So things like gray jays, you know, boreal chickadees, blackback woodpeckers. Every once in a while, someone will spot one of those. But it's really nice having that boreal forest area to go up to and kind of enjoy. Additionally, being on the Great Lakes, we have, you know, Superior and Lake Michigan. So that brings a lot of stuff up on the lakeshore and also just out on those lakes. So I think people often underestimate how big the lakes are. We had someone come over and do a tour with us from Florida, and they were like, I always thought you could just see the other side of Lake Michigan. Like, they don't understand that it's virtually an ocean. So that was kind of funny. And then we actually have an area in the southwestern part of the state called the Driftless area. So that's a very like hilly spot. And it's called the driftless area because they think the glaciers didn't actually come and kind of squash that as they moved through. So you have a lot of hills, and we actually have a desert area in Wisconsin too, which really shocked us when we started because we had no idea that that was anywhere in the States. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, so we found this graph, which is actually very interesting, of species observed in Wisconsin and eBird. So you can see it's actually on the rise, and in the last couple of years has had some of the highest totals that we've ever had in the state at 356, 2 consecutive years in a row. So that tells us that most likely more people are out birding. I don't necessarily think there's that many more species that come up, but I think there's more people to find them now.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool to look at the historical data. Aaron Stutz kind of compiled some interesting stats from Wisconsin eBird. And this kind of highlights the big four counties, as I call them in Wisconsin. So starting off on the top left, we have Milwaukee, followed by Dane, which is in South Central, Sauk County, which is just west of Dane, and then Dorr, which is way up kind of in the tip of the mitten of Wisconsin. And so these four counties provide the top four amount of species. So Milwaukee and Dane always have tons of birders there. They're always finding cool stuff. So those are really your highlighted communities in the state. And overall, there were over 220,000 eBird checklists submitted in 2023 from the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee and Dane provided about 25% of all those checklists. So probably like kind of an area like, Cook County here has a lot of the concentrated birders. And then the top 12 counties provided half of the checklist, the bottom 12 just over 2%. So a lot of states you'll find that where they have these main places where there's a lot of birders. There's probably a lot of underbirded areas where rare stuff is, but nobody's really looking.
Yeah, and aside from that too, if you look at the state and the migratory flyways, you have the one that goes right over Lake Michigan, essentially catches Milwaukee, the one that goes right over Dane, and then right in the county where we live, they just miss it completely. So those are two great spots for migratory species, and there's just tons of people out there looking. So it's just a ridiculous amount of birders in those places compared to the other counties.
Yeah, so let's move on to some of the signature species that you can find in the state that maybe you guys have actually come up to see over time.
Yeah, so number one on the list, we have the whooping crane. Who here's seen whooping cranes before in the wild? All right, so a good amount of people. Obviously, one of the most massive birds that we have in the country, pure white on most of the body with the black tips of their wings and then some red on the face as well. The whooping crane is still a species that is of concern, even though their numbers have grown pretty substantially. There was a point in their history where they were actually down to somewhere between 16 and 20 birds, most likely, left in all of existence. And that number is a little varied because they just did counts of them in the Aransas Wildlife Refuge area, which is where they were wintering in Texas near Corpus Christi. And that was just what they came up with was 16 total birds with a couple in other places. So it's a pretty crazy story of the whooping crane to come back. But that story led to a population of them being created in Wisconsin. You might have heard the stories before about how they would then breed them in captivity and then use ultralight aircrafts to fly them back so that they actually got taught to migrate. I believe it's Florida to Wisconsin that population goes to now. So there's, I believe, 4 populations of whooping cranes left in the country. There's the one that goes from Texas to Canada. That's the original population that actually subsisted through all the struggles that the species had. There's a Florida to Wisconsin population, and then there's one that is in Florida year-round that doesn't migrate, and then one in Louisiana that also doesn't migrate. So the species has had a really nice recovery, but Wisconsin is actually one of the best places to find them, in my opinion, because they are going to be there breeding in the summer. So some of the places to look for these is going to be Nesita Wildlife Refuge is an area where people know that whooping cranes are, and then Horicon is another great place to try and find these birds. We actually one time had a confirmed chick raised to adulthood in Horicon Marsh, so that was a pretty cool thing for the species.
So next up, we have the Kirtland's warbler. They're also a species of concern. They do nest in kind of the jack pine habitats in the middle of the state, and the management of those forests is really interesting because they only nest in jack pines that are like a certain height. So if you go to those forest areas, you'll see different levels of jack pine forest that you go through as they're kind of getting them prepared for the next year. So they're super picky about the habitat that they'll actually use.
10 to 13 feet.
Yeah, if it gets too tall, they won't be there. If it's too short, they won't be there. So they're constantly managing and working on getting the habitat right for these birds. And what's cool is they actually do breed in Wisconsin. So this is another species that people really like to come to the state to see. It's a little hard to find them because some of the specific areas they kind of keep quiet because they don't want a lot of disturbance in there, but you definitely can find them in the state.
Yeah, it's a little sketchy though to try to find them. It's a secret that people keep. So if you're like, where are the Kirtland's warblers? People just like don't know. So they're around if you know where the habitat is though. But I do remember the first time that we ever saw them was partially because a different rare warbler was seen there, and then on the checklist it was Kirtland's warblers also. So people took notice of that and started posting it everywhere, and that's kind of how people started to find it.
Yeah, this map got a little blurry, but you can kind of see the patchy distribution of where they kind of hang out. And, you know, Michigan's another big place, but a lot of people do come to Wisconsin to find the Kirtland's warbler.
It's kind of crazy because people didn't know that they nested in Wisconsin for a long time, actually. They thought it was just Canada and then Michigan, and then all of a sudden that population was discovered. So hopefully that species will continue to grow as well because they do a lot of management of it. If you ever go to one of those areas, you'll see cowbird traps too, because obviously the cowbirds are a big problem for Kirtland's warblers. And another thing is that Kirtland's warblers are ground nesters too. So just traffic in the area is a problem for them as well. But yeah, they're doing a good job trying to manage that, and they're starting to get better as population. And then another one that we have that's very interesting is the greater prairie chicken. So greater prairie chickens, one of the best places to find them in Wisconsin is Buena Vista grasslands. That's another area where it is a managed population. So they're doing work to make sure there's not predators there, to make sure that they don't get disturbed too much. And Buena Vista is a wild place to go birding. If you ever get the chance to go there, I would highly suggest it. It's well, we'll talk about it more later, but it's one of the best places to find the prairie chickens. And if you go there early in the morning, especially during winter, they like to sit up in some of the trees, and they just look like a bunch of big fluffy Christmas ornaments. So if you cruise the roads there, you can find them. And then another cool opportunity is that the University of Stevens Point actually allows people to go into blinds and watch them while they're lekking. So for those of you that don't know, lekking is essentially when they're in their mating displays. And so you can actually get a somewhat up close view of the greater prairie chickens there if you rent one of those blinds, which is a pretty unique opportunity.
Yeah, one year we did have a gyrfalcon that showed up at Buena Vista grasslands, which was cool because people got to go see a gyrfalcon, but it was presumed that was feeding on all the prairie chickens there. So it wasn't great for the prairie chicken population, but it was cool to see a gyrfalcon so far south.
That was a bummer. And what's interesting too is if you look at this map, this is the historic range of the greater prairie chicken. It doesn't even show Wisconsin being a place that they are, but they are definitely in Buena Vista grasslands. But you can see that they used to be a lot more expansive in their range, which is kind of sad because so much of their habitat was destroyed. They've now been relegated to such a small amount of space.
So next up, we have the Connecticut warbler. Unfortunately, this is a species that seems like they're declining. They do nest in the boreal forest, and they can be seen in migration in Wisconsin a few days a year. So normally in the spring and the fall, we'll have a couple days where Connecticut warblers get reported. And that's kind of your best time to go see them. Ryan Brady, one of our DNR biologists who kind of monitors the Connecticut warbler population, said we only had about 3 pairs that were breeding in the state. So he advised all the birders to not even go and look for them in their nesting grounds, just to kind of help have those pairs be successful. So it was unfortunate to hear that we only had a couple pairs breeding. But we did have a few pass through that people were able to see on their way up and back. And they're always a fun species to find because of the way they just walk on the ground. So like, you know, unlike other warblers that'll hop around from branch to branch, they just like to kind of walk, and it's a goofy thing to observe.
Yeah, and when it says can be seen a few days a year during migration, it really does seem like there's 2 to 3 days when they come through, and then people can kind of get them, and then after that they're kind of just gone until fall. So definitely one of our trickiest warbler species to see, I would say, even trickier than some of the more rare species that you think of in the Midwest.
Yeah, and so most of the time we'll see them in like the Milwaukee area, just kind of passing through, and then they do breed further north.
And then this is obviously one of the most charismatic species I think we have in the Midwest in general is the snowy owl. And this is a bird that we were shocked lived in Wisconsin when we first started, because I think for so many people it's a big spark bird. You know, you think about them in the high tundra and you don't assume that they even come anywhere near where you live generally. But there was one at the airport in Waukesha the first year we were birding, and we went to go see it, and it was one of the coolest experiences for young birders that are new to the hobby. But these will live in open fields. They'll be in Milwaukee, sometimes along the lakefront and some of the more industrial areas, which is kind of strange. And you'll also find them in the central part of the state a lot too, unless there's an eruption, in which case they're kind of all over the place. There was one year we were just walking around a local marsh and we happened upon one as well. So this has been a very unfortunately bad year for snowy owls. And the reason for that is usually because the prior year's lemming population was low. So the higher the lemming population, the more food the snowy owls have to the following year. So last year must have been a low lemming population year for them.
Yeah, it's a little other eruptive species, such as like those eruptive finches, where normally they're moving because they need food. With the snowies, it's kind of based on how many there are. If there's a lot, then they kind of go down into the south. If there's not as many, they can kind of stay in that area. So not necessarily coming down to get food like some of those other traditional eruptive species.
And here's the range map for the snowies, and it's funny how much their winter range encompasses Canada and the United States, but there have been some years where they'll get all the way down to even California, or I think Florida had one year, which caused a pretty big stir.
That'd be wild.
I think it happened. I didn't, don't call me out on that, but I think it happened. And then we also have some unique non-natives that we actually have to thank people in Chicago for, because most of these birds escaped at some point from captivity in Illinois and now live up by us. So great tit is one of the most interesting ones. If you've never seen one before, they're almost like a chickadee. They have a yellowish underside with a black stripe that goes through. And we have one city, Sheboygan, where there's a nesting group of them. So people go to Kohler Andre State Park and sometimes see them there. And they're thinking that someday they could even be countable, but we'll see if that population grows. European goldfinch is another one that's in the southern part of our state. They actually used to live in Kenosha at the store called the Bird's Nest, and then the Bird's Nest closed, and then they just kind of dispersed all over the place. So people are always in search of them, and there's no really good place to get them anymore. But sometimes you just stumble upon them when you're just out birding, and it's a pretty cool experience. Eurasian tree sparrow, another one that you guys have, way more than we do actually, but they're starting to encroach a little bit north, so they're becoming more common. And then Eurasian collar doves are kind of spreading all over the United States, but for a while it was a species that in our state you can only get in a few places. But it is kind of cool to have these unique non-natives in the state. But you guys know about that because you have monk parakeets, so.
So let's move on to some of the top locations to visit. And these locations will encompass some of the species we talked about being signature species of the state. So obviously one of the big ones is Horicon Marsh, where people come from all over the world, and kind of the big headline with it is that it's the world's largest freshwater cattail marsh.
A lot of adjectives.
Yeah, I always remember that fact. But it was a big spot for the reintroduction of trumpeter swans, which actually have a really nice population there, especially in the summer. It can be a great place to go and look for those. And although people kind of go to Horicon year round, I think spring is definitely the best because you get the migrants moving through, all the waterfowl are there. Some of the trails are more open than they would be at other times of the year. So if you're going to Horicon, spring is definitely the best time to go. And we actually did a video called A Birder's Guide to Horicon Marsh that touches on all the specific places you can visit and kind of the best spots to go. So if you've never been there before, we definitely recommend making a trip there this spring.
Yeah, you can definitely spend an entire day there as well, because there's just so much habitat to explore. And I feel like it's one of the only marshes of its kind where you can just kind of go through the marsh, because some of the dike roads will just take you straight into the heart of it, which is really neat because then you get to see rails along the cattails, and you get kind of an up close look at some places for shorebirds. It's a really good place for least bitterns and American bitterns too. I actually remember the first time we went there, we were just driving along one of the roads, and an American bittern just decides to slowly walk in front of our car and just impeded our progress. And I'm just like, oh, this place is crazy. I bet you'll see that all the time here for the rest of your life. And then it's the only time that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, like sometimes when you're starting birding, you get an experience and you're like, oh, that's common. And then like 10 years later, like that's never happened to me again. So that was definitely one of those. And it's a really good place for least bittern, actually. If you walk certain areas, you can normally see them hanging out, doing the splits between the breeds. So that's one we normally go there for every year. Blackneck stilt as well is a kind of a signature species of Horicon.
Also, I need to ask your opinion on this, because I was told by somebody that the best place to find marsh birds in the Chicago area is like behind a Walmart or something. Is that true? That's what I was told. I was like, the only place you can find black terns in Illinois is behind this one Walmart or something. So
I think a Walmart associate told you that. Like,
yeah, he was like, you got to check out this Walmart. It's crazy birding there. So one of my favorite places to go, not only because of proximity to where we live is so close, but just because of the diversity there that you get in the birds, is the Milwaukee Lakefront. And this is a great place to go no matter what time of year it is. When it's winter time and you get some of the ice starting to form on the lake, you get a lot of cool sea ducks that come down. So usually all three scoter species will be there, long-tailed ducks will be there, the snowies will be there. And then obviously in spring too, you get tons of warblers. That migratory flyway is awesome. So as Derek was saying, that's where you can get the Connecticut's. That's where you can get pretty much all of the species of warblers that come through. Louisiana water thrush, which for us is a little bit of a rarity. I don't know if it is down here so much. But we've had so many rare birds or so many days too where we've had to travel down there. Actually, our first video was of trying to find a king eider in Milwaukee along the lakefront.
Yeah, that was a cool rarity to find. But you know, the stuff we get there is probably similar to what you get at Montrose Point. And I feel like Biggest Week always totes that as like, you know, oh, the warbler capital of the world. But like, you know, we know what we get in our states. Like we get most of the same stuff they do. So it's an amazing place to go. We also, you know, get the Great Lakes piping plovers on the shore there. And we've actually had a population of harlequin ducks that have been hanging out on the lakefront for like the past couple of years. So they've been a pretty reliable species to see, which is nice because when we started birding, they were kind of infrequent. Now they're kind of there all the time.
Yeah, I would say it is. I don't want to compare it to Montrose Point because I don't want anybody to get mad at us and throw us out. But you get a lot of good stuff there. So if you ever get tired of birding Montrose Point, you can head a little bit north and try your luck in Milwaukee and add some stuff to your state list.
So next up, we have Spring Green Preserve, and this is what I was talking about with Wisconsin's desert. So they actually have prickly pear cacti there. It's a very desert-like landscape. There's timber rattlesnakes that breed there. There's different lizards. It's just a totally different style of place that we had no idea existed. And so there's bluffs, there's sand. We had blue grosbeaks show up there. I think that was the thing that drew us there the first time. And once we were there, we were like, wow, this is kind of like a hidden gem in the state that not many people kind of know about unless they're in like a naturalist and they go there for that purpose.
Had a painted redstart there last year too, so that was random.
Yeah, yellow-breasted chat is there too. So it's a really unique environment that you can walk around. The trails kind of take you into the forest too, so you can experience those different habitats. And it's just it's a wild feeling to be there. You feel like you've been transplanted somewhere out west. So
Yeah,
would
what's
definitely
interesting
recommend.
about it too is it's not that big. So, I mean, there's two sections of it, but the trails that you can walk are not that expansive. So you can kind of just go in, check out everything that's going on, and then get out without it being a huge ordeal. But there's kind of one central trail that just takes you through the bluffs and then into the forest, and a lot of good birds there that we don't get really anywhere else in our state. So definitely a unique habitat that the birds have found. This is the one I was talking about earlier, is Buena Vista Grasslands. We have a really good friend named Rob, who's basically the steward of Buena Vista, even though he's actually just a birder that lives in Stevens
He
Point.
loves his county lists.
Loves
He's all
his
about his
county
county.
list, yeah. So at any point you go up there and you're like, how have the chickens been lately? And he'll be like, oh, I saw 17 of them on town line that are reliable. So that's helpful. But there's a lot of other great stuff there too, depending on the year. So depending on the time of year rather. So in winter, short-eared owls, snowy owls, the kind of stuff that hangs out on the roadside, like Lapland longsbirds and snow buntings. One of the best places in the state to get western meadowlark during the summertime, and then also brewer's blackbird, grasshopper sparrow, and upland sandpiper. So true to its name, it is just a large grassland with a lot of roads that you can just drive, and there's a lot of good stuff to find there. It is pretty expansive too, so it's easy to spend a lot of time there looking. If you do spend a lot of time, you'll probably find some good birds.
Next up, we have Crex Meadows, which is a place in the northwest part of the state. And kind of the big claim to fame of Crex Meadows is a gargany showed up there once. And that was like the first year we were birding. So we ended up not making it up there. But it's a really neat grassland and marsh area. Some other species you can find there are LeConte sparrows and redneck grebes. So we don't have a ton of experience with Crex, but from what we've heard, it's a really good place to go. Probably an underbirded destination, honestly, with kind of how far away it is from those counties we highlighted. So probably need some more birders up there checking it out.
And then another one that we like to take an annual trip to is Wyalusing State Park. Obviously very close to the border of both Iowa and I think also Illinois. This is one of the few places in the state where you can reliably get some of these more southern warbler species, most notably Kentucky, Prothonotary cerulean, and then also yellow-throated. So this is an excellent place to go if you're looking for migratory species because those warblers do breed there, and then also Acadian flycatcher. And the one thing to watch out for if you go to Wyalusing is that there are a lot of black flies there, or mosquitoes, depending on the time of year. So I would suggest wearing some netting just in case. The first year we went, it was absolutely beautiful and there weren't many bugs. Last year when we went, you couldn't be out of your car for more than 2 minutes without getting swarmed. So really beautiful views right along the Mississippi. It elevates to some bluffs that overlook the entire river and overlook Iowa. So really beautiful place. It has camping as well. And you never know what's going to show up there during migration, but you are pretty much guaranteed, I would say, if you have a good ear, to find a cerulean warbler if you go there in spring when they're back. So that's a really neat place to go do that.
Some other cool places to go, Devil's Lake has been a hot spot. So that's kind of in the more middle part of the state, and it's a really cool bluff area. So you can actually climb up the bluff. And the big thing that we had there was a gray crown rosy finch that was found, and you kind of had to do this crazy bluff hike to go find it. So it's one of these trails that it's basically rock steps, and if it's icy, it can actually be really treacherous. So it feels like a real adventure to go find that bird. And then Townsend solitaires are there pretty much every year. And then there was a golden eagle hanging out there. So kind of if you made the trip at the right time, you could go for all three of those Western birds. And we were kind of calling it a little Western bird haven. Because you again, you feel like you're transplanted to another land. So you could go to the desert, you could go to the west, and you could go to the lakefront and feel like you're in a bunch of different states.
Yeah, Devil's Lake was one of the first places we took a real trip to go see a bird, because there was a Townsend solitaire there, and that was the first time that we would ever be seeing one. So we went up this big bluff. It took a while. It felt like it was this cool expedition. When we got to the top, we were looking around, had no idea how to find the Townsend solitaire. We just knew it was somewhere at Devil's Lake. Got a little bit of snow flurries kind of sprinkling around the air, and then we all of a sudden see it just swoop up and sit there on one of the trees, one of the conifers, and Derek snapped a picture of it, and you see the little snow sprinkles in the background. And I think that was the moment that really solidified that birding was a cool, fun adventure for us, was having to go through that process and then find it was such a nice reward.
Yeah, that's a bird you definitely have to work for. So when you see it, it feels really rewarding. And I also remember when we started birding the first year, I was the only one who had a camera. And so it was kind of like I was in charge of taking pictures of everything. And so I would be like trying to get one right and be like, it's over there, it's over there. It was like a spotter and like photographer setup.
And then I would look at it and be like, did you get anything good? And I'd be like, oh.
Yeah, I remember we spent like an hour trying to get a golden crown kinglet photo once, because it was like the first one we saw and we wanted a picture of everything. So we're just standing there. I'm like, it's over there, it's over here. It was just a whole ordeal, but we eventually got a photo of it.
I do kind of miss those times when I had less responsibility, actually.
Yeah.
And I could just be like, well, you didn't do a good job getting a photo. So.
Yeah, so some other places to go are the North Woods, and then the Madison area is really good in the spring. A lot of goose and duck migration over there. So you can find in the flooded fields some shorebirds. Normally you can find all of the main geese species that kind of come through, and then a lot of the ducks. So during migration, we'll hit the lakefront, and then we'll also hit the Madison area a lot. So those are two huge destinations.
I think the North Woods is worth a little more discussion too, though, because he mentioned earlier that you used to be able to get boreal stuff like blackback woodpecker, boreal chickadee up there, gray jay / Canada jay. I still like to call it a gray jay, Canada jay. And now it doesn't seem like that stuff is as common up there. I think people sometimes get that stuff, but you really have to grind it out and go for multiple days if you want a chance at one. But it's still a really good place to go to see evening grosbeaks in the wintertime, different crossbill species, spruce grouse you can have a chance running with. So it's a really cool place to go still, because it's just totally different from anything that we have down here, unless you want to go to, you know, the forests of Canada or the Saxon bog. So it's a place that if you need any of those species, might be worth checking out at some point in time, even though it's definitely a trek. And if it also feels like an expedition, because you're just in the Schwamingen forest pretty much, in the Nicolay forest.
Yeah, Bohemian waxwing and pine grosbeak are other good ones you can find too. It's been a decent year up there for Bohemian waxwing, so we got some of those earlier in the year. Pine grosbeak's been a little more tough. So let's move on to some of the festivals that you can go to in Wisconsin. Now, there's a lot of different groups like the WSO, Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. They have a convention. So a lot of groups kind of host their own festival or event throughout the year. But some of the other ones are like the Horicon Marsh Burning Festival. That can be a great time if you haven't really been to the marsh before and you want to be there when a lot of other people are going to be exploring as well. Jagerfest is kind of an informal festival that happens in Wisconsin Point. And it's basically just a bunch of people looking on Lake Superior for Jaegers, Sabin's gulls. I've heard that the parking is kind of sketchy there. Some people have had their car broken into at certain points.
You're selling it well, yeah.
I've never been there, so you've been there though.
Yeah, I've
Did
been
your
there
car get
before.
broken?
I didn't drive my own car, which I think is the strategy, is have someone else drive.
So Uber to Wisconsin Point, get dropped off.
Or have a friend that's willing to go and don't tell them about the smash and grabs that might happen. But it is a really cool place because Wisconsin Point is an area that juts out into Lake Superior. And especially when the weather's bad during September, those Jaegers and Salmon gulls are forced closer to shore. So you get all that stuff that's migrating across Lake Superior that then kind of makes landfall or just flies closer to shore. So as Derek said, it is very informal. It's kind of like, you going to Jaegerfest? And people are like, some of us are going to Jaegerfest. Do you register? Nope. So it's just a bunch of people show up there and start watching the birds. But there's always a lot of crazy things that get reported there. Harris's sparrows are reported there, California gulls sometimes. Last year there's a glaucous winged gull. So you're always in for some good birds if you go there. Like I said, especially if you have some transportation that's not your own.
Or just an old car.
Or an old car that, yeah, you don't care about.
Another one's the Schwamigan Bay Birding and Nature Festival. So that's a cool one if you want to go up to the North Woods as well. So let's move on to some of the fun birding controversies. So one is gatekeeping, which is kind of the basic idea of it is some people know where a bird is. They only tell certain people where it is. Then, other people are like, well, why can't I go? And it just kind of gets into a whole thing. One
I see
specific
people
one,
shaking their head, yeah. Somebody's been gatekept before in here.
one specific one was a Clark's Nutcracker that showed up in the middle of the state. It was kind of like the homeowners only wanted certain people. So like a group kind of got together and decided who should be able to go or not. And it kind of became this weird thing, like what criteria are you using to do this? And it just gets kind of complicated, especially when there's like private property. Oh, it's talking about gate. Yeah. So another big thing is the ethical treatment of owls, which I know has been a big thing in Illinois, Minnesota, bordering states. So, photographers trying to do anything they can to get the perfect shot. So I've heard stories of people even like shaking tree branches to get an owl to move to a better perch, which of course none of us should be doing, or just like making owls get freaked out, kind of like, this long-eared owl on the right. So there's certain areas where sensitive species are, where select people know, and then it kind of becomes this, like, they're not supposed to tell anyone, but they'll tell a friend, and then it kind of spreads that way. So it's like the worst kept secret in the state of where some of these birds are hanging out. So
you actually get a good combination too of gatekeeping and owl ethics too, because there'll be something that's reported that a certain group of people want to go back to day after day and take photos of, and they don't tell anybody else. Then they post photos of this terrified looking owl and everyone's like, good photos, nice photos. So we've had some issues with that with saw-whet owls actually, where people keep posting the same bird over and over again, to the point where some of our Facebook groups have said we're not allowing owl photos anymore at all. So
Wait a minute. So the bird doesn't usually look like that?
you might be surprised, but no.
No?
Yeah, so normally like they say a sleepy owl is a happy owl. So if you find a roosting owl, they should look relaxed. If they're frightened, they'll get very thin because they see you as a predator and they're trying to become invisible. So if you see an owl that's like staring right at you with it's a sign that they're stressed. So in that situation, you want to back off, give it some space, maybe even leave the area. So a lot of the times when you see those photos where they're like, oh, so fierce, like great photo, a lot of times the owl's, stressed out about something.
And long-eared owls in particular, because they'll abandon roosting sites. So we used to have a really nice roost of them where I think there was around 16 in one area and people just kept going day after day. And now I think we're down to one or two, because a lot of them have left the area, sadly. So yeah, it would be nice for everybody to be able to kind of be respectful and see the birds get in, get out if you wanted to see them. But
it's tough because birds like owls are so cool and they're such a spark bird for so many people that you want people to go see them and then want to continue birding and get into conservation. But it's just, a couple people tend to kind of ruin it for everyone by doing unethical things. So if you can get people into those areas, treat the birds respectfully, that's all great. It's just when there's kind of a line that gets crossed that things kind of go south with that. And to the point where even eBird hides some of the particular locations for certain species. So it can be getting to kind of a gray area. Another one is the use of playback. I remember there was a king rail at Horicon Marsh, or there was somebody who was just using playback during the breeding season, and someone like went off on them for doing that, and it turned into a whole thing too. And then your good old personal conflicts where one person just has something against somebody else, and then you know, turns into a feud, one quits the birding world or something. I'm sure it happens in every
There've been
state.
some wild stories. That one also goes with gatekeeping too. That's usually there's interesting controversies all over the birding community where if you're not involved with them, they can be amusing to listen to. But if you are involved with them, they're not.
Yeah, so it's kind of a, you know, let's be respectful to people and wildlife, and then a lot of the issues get avoided. So let's move on to some of the cool rare birds that have showed up in Wisconsin. The big one was the American flamingo that showed up. There was a group of 5 that showed up on the lakefront at Port Washington. And that was a wild scene. Me and my friend Nathaniel showed up right kind of after they got reported, and just crowds of people were lining the beach. You'll see it in the next photo, but it was a very odd atmosphere because all the birders were super happy and you know, excited about this. Then you had like regular people just using the beach, people walking their dogs, like, what are you guys looking at? Flamingos. So this was a wild scene. Recently, we had a field fair in the state too. It showed up in the northwest corner, which is about 6 hours away from where we live. So me and some of my friends went on it. It had this weird habit of showing up in the There we go. We're back. All this technology, right? All right. Another one we had was that gray crown rosy finch over at Devil's Lake. That was like a really cool bird to see. And then we've been part of the limpkin invasion. So we've had some limpkins show up in the state. Have you guys had a lot of limpkin pop in? So those have been really neat. I know that their whaling calls are super loud and sometimes they call at night. So people have actually been getting kind of annoyed if they have a random bird wailing at 3 a.m. in their backyard. Something I wanted to mention that was funny about the flamingos is they actually showed up during Jägerfest. So you had a bunch of birders in the northwest part of the state who thought they were going to get all these rare birds, and then flamingos showed up in the southeast. So they like drove all the way back like 6 hours, and thankfully they were kind of seen a little bit after that, but I thought they were all going to miss it.
Yeah.
That would have been a bad beat.
Well, what happened to the flamingos was they left the lakefront where they were super easy and they went to some inland lake where they were super difficult because the only way that you could really see them was to take a kayak around this point. So I had to work when Derek saw the flamingos. So my friend Rob was like, you should just come and use my kayak and see them. So I ended up going and using the kayak. And I said he did it the easy way and I had to do it the hard way, but it was worth it.
Yeah, but a cool experience nonetheless. I'm glad a bunch of people got to see those, and you know they showed up in a lot of places. Did you guys ever get some, or did they show up? No. The flamingos. Yeah, they
showed up in somebody's yard.
Wait. Naval station? Which is a restricted area? I don't know.
gatekeeping.
That's right, we came up to Milwaukee, but we missed them.
Uh,
And then we went to that other lake, out west, and we didn't see them.
Yeah, sometimes the birds just don't cooperate. Sometimes you really do have to be at the right place, right time. Probably the biggest understatement of the presentation.
Yeah,
Sometimes
definitely.
birds don't cooperate. So this was the site of the American flamingo. So just a wild day at the beach. You know, people were there with their kids, and you
Did
know,
that guy have an office chair with wheels?
yeah, this guy was ready. He was like, I'm gonna be here all day. So through kind of our birding journey, we started our YouTube channel, Badgerland Birding. And so I pulled the stats from earlier today, actually, to what we're up to. So we're at 4,948,822 views, 276,974 hours of watch time, 29,627 subscribers, and 451 videos published. So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
How you make a living now?
We wish.
So a lot of that content is educational. We have a, learn 25 common backyard bird calls videos. We talk about some species that can be problematic in your yard, and a lot of it's us going on adventures looking for different birds. So we have the flamingo adventures when I went to go see them, when Ryan went to go see them, the field fair, the gray crown rosy finch. So if you guys don't want to make the trip up to Wisconsin, you can always watch a video and kind of feel like you went there yourself. Also, a couple we did in Illinois, we went to see the monk parakeets. I went down to go see the Ross's gull, which is pretty cool. So we do some from other states and even other countries. So we're working on, making that even bigger and kind of reaching more people, hoping to get people interested in birds and conservation. And then I wanted to add a little section about birding in the future, because obviously birding's changed a lot over time, even just the world that we can do this presentation on Zoom, as opposed to having everything be in person. So I wanted to look a little bit at if birding is becoming more popular. There was a 2019 report from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that found that over 45 million Americans participate in bird watching activities, which is up from 12 million in 1980. So it's actually, a large number of people participating in some kind of birding appreciation. Also, we saw an increase in birders from COVID when people were locked down in their house. They wanted something to do. They started looking at their feeders. They started going to parks. They got interested in birding. So we have that carrying over. And then we've also seen kind of an influx in young birders too. A lot of homeschooled kids do birding, and then I get jealous because they can go out and bird whenever they want.
Well, we do have a couple of friends we know that say they specifically are homeschooled because they want to go birding. So apparently their parents were actually like, sure, I guess.
Yeah, and we actually had a 16-year-old birder from Texas on our podcast called the Badgerland Birding Podcast. His name is Ryan Rodriguez. He's kind of a
Wild
really
card.
he's a wild card. He's a real big, like, up and coming birder, and he's ear skills are phenomenal, and he's doing some guiding at 16 years old in the Rio Grande Valley. So, don't we all wish we could do that? But so there's some a bright future for some young birders out there, hopefully more in the future. And if you want a closer look at some of the birds in Wisconsin, we also do tours up in the state. So if any of the places we talked about sound cool, you want us to, guide you up there, we do tours and stuff like that. We got some cards if anyone would like one. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll take any questions that you guys have about anything we talked about, and thanks so much.
There was a question in the chat
Okay.
early on about, are there any specific parks in Milwaukee that you recommend?
So there's a lot of them. Lake Park is a really good one. It has these really cool ravines that you can go down into. So you can kind of walk above them and see birds below you. And then you can also go in the ravines and see the birds above you. So that's a really good place for warblers and the other migrants. And then Grant Park is also a really good one as well. It has some beach to it too. So you can sometimes get good gulls and shorebirds there. And that also has forests. So there's a couple other ones. Warnemont Park is good.
Warnemont was really big last year. A lot of the cool stuff got reported at Warnemont.
Yeah, it seems like depending on the day in spring, it's a different place every time. So sometimes it'll be Warnemont, sometimes it'll be Grant, sometimes it'll be Lake. So just all those places with greenery along the lakefront are usually pretty good during that time of year.
Yeah.
Up by Froder Hospital of North Milwaukee, there was a psychiatric park. I mean, it used to have a psychiatric hospital, and it was a natural park. A lot of dog walkers were there. And there was a huge population of long-eared owls there years ago. And there was talk of developing that park. Do you know if it's still there or?
I don't think it's been developed.
No, it's still there, but they still have signs about it being developed. So I don't know how long it's going to be there for, but I know there was some effort to try to prevent it from being developed, but it's still there right now.
Okay, thank you.
Are long-eared owls, are those sensitive in Wisconsin and Newburgh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can't really find exactly where they are, and people are hesitant to share it too. So I know of like that one place where there's a couple of them left, and that's about it. And this year 2 of them were just out in the open along the lake in some place, which was weird. So a bunch of people got those, but they're sensitive, great grays sensitive, hawk owl sensitive, gyrfalcon sensitive. So a lot of the cool stuff that we were able to see when we first started, it's hard to
Yeah,
find
we
anymore.
were saying, because when we started, we got to see northern hawk owl in the state. We saw that gyrfalcon. We're wondering if, when people start, how accessible a lot of those species are going to be in the future, or if they're even going to start hiding things like saw-whet owls and stuff like that. So we'll see kind of how it turns out.
Yeah, which it's too bad too, because it does get people interested in it. So if somebody gets to see a northern hawk owl, that's gonna be something that's gonna propel them, for the rest of their time, probably wanting to see more birds and maybe even helping out nature or supporting different causes. But if you never get the chance, then you're not gonna have that. But at the same time, you have falconers that want to come out and take birds, you have photographers that want to get really close to it and potentially spook it away. So it's just a tough thing to navigate.
Are eagles a big predator to the owls? I mean,
So apparently one of the ones that was hanging out in the open in Milwaukee got taken by a rough-legged hawk. So I would imagine an eagle would predate one if it was out in the open enough. But
yeah.
I mean, rough-legged hawk seems like a weird thing, but that was the story that people were saying.
Yeah, we haven't heard a lot about eagles taking that kind of stuff, but I'm sure, like he said, it would happen if it got the chance to. So yeah.
What time of the year or when is Jaeger fest?
September. Yep.
Every day.
Yeah, it could be every day if you want it to be. They say it's Jaegerfest somewhere all the time.
Yeah.
What county was the field fair in?
So that was in,
The Bayfield.
I think it was Bayfield. It was in the town of Ashland.
It was in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was as far north of Loud as you could get,
Question about parking fees for Wisconsin State Parks.
Mhm.
I think I remember that you can drive through a state park if you're from Illinois, but if you park, you might get a ticket. So I don't know if that's true or if there's out of state, like a fee that you can buy for a 10-pack or something.
Uh-huh.
Because I don't know, I wrote notes about the places that you said, but I don't know if they're part of Wisconsin State Park and how the parking would work for me.
Sure. So I don't know about driving through a state park or not, but normally you can there's like little stations if it is a state park. There should be a sign that lets you know if you're entering one, and you can get a pass for the year, which if you're going to a bunch of them might be worth doing.
It's
But
not that pricey.
they also
either.
have day admission too. And the parks pass is just a sticker you put on the front.
Where would you buy that?
It should be one of those stations. You should be able to fill it out. If it's like operating hours, there's probably going to be someone at the window who might be able to help. Yeah.
I could actually answer that. Just go to Wisconsin DNR. I actually have a non-resident. It's $38 for the year.
Oh,
Nice.
It's only the calendar year, so it ends at the end of 2024. So if you get it on December 1st, it's
Wow.
still gonna be the same price in St. But I'll probably be going Richard Bong 4 times. The closest DNR site though. So,
Well,
Sure.
you should just do a loop around the state.
yeah,
Just take a few days off, Make the most out of that sticker.
yeah.
Any other questions?
So I actually went up to see that great crown relief bench in Devil's Lake. I thought I'd heard that there were like 3 of them. Was
Mhm.
that ever confirmed?
So that was the original poster said he thought there was 3, but I don't think it was confirmed that there was ever more than 1.
But then later on, 3 of them showed up at someone's bird feeder north of there, like pretty significantly north. So there could have been 3 the whole time, or there could have been a different group of them that came through. But we only ever saw 1 when we were there, because people would say, "Oh, we just heard one, off in the distance," and we'd look at our videos and stuff, and it was the same one that was there just singing. So I don't think anyone ever got eyes on more than 1 at a time there, but it's possible with the 3 that showed up at someone's feeder.
Yeah.
How did you learn to identify all these birds? I mean, is there a particular field guide you use, or do you use eBird, or is it just working with other people?
Sure. So initially we kind of like our nature center we would go to when we were little is called Retzer Nature Center. So a lot of times we would take a picture and we'd go to the naturalist there and be like, can you help us identify what we found? And early on we did find like a random red-shouldered hawk, which is pretty good for the state. And like he helped us with that. So kind of his guidance helped us with some of that. And then pretty much just learning online. It was not really when Merlin was that widely used when we started. So I feel like it's a lot easier now to access that, but it was kind of just taking a picture, looking at it later. We started birding only with cameras. So we would take pictures of everything and then go review it at a later time.
I feel like a lot of times we would just kind of go out and see stuff and then try to figure out what it was later, or we would see that stuff was reported and go try to get it. So we kind of just had the desire to like go try to figure it out, you know, in the field. So we didn't really do a very good job of planning what we were going to see always. We would just go see it and then figure out what it was later. And over time, especially I think making the content, we learned a lot about how to identify stuff, because if you're wrong, people are going to point it out. So, you know, you have to be pretty good at making sure you get the right ID.
How many days a week do you guys bird?
This year it's been less. We did it, well, I mean, we did a South Texas trip where we were birding every day, but we try to get out at least once a week. We both have other jobs that we do in addition to that. We'd love to do this full time, but for now we have other jobs. So unfortunately, we can't do the homeschool schedule and just bird every day.
Yeah, I think too, as you have seen more stuff, you do have a little less desire sometimes to see it again. So at first, you know, oh, surf scooter, that's new, I want to go see it. Now it's like surf scooter, seen probably hundreds of those, you know, I'm not that into go seeing it necessarily. You give me a look. You wanna go see it, but
Yeah, and I feel like once you travel, like after we came back from South Texas, I'm like, Blue Jays. I don't know, things don't seem as interesting in your home state. as
when
much.
there's not a live bird to catch,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not as exciting. But we really like making the videos out of stuff. So sometimes, you know, we'll just go film something. And we took a walk today before the presentation when we were back in Waukesha, and we're looking for some stuff. So
Yeah, like,
we get out as much as we can.
once you kind of see those species, you tend to appreciate other things, like, you know, even just a white-throated sparrow. I was looking at the way they, like, you know, kick up the ground underneath. So even if you've seen a bird like 100 times, there's always something to appreciate.
Don't they call that deep birding?
Slow birding.
Slow
I think
birding,
is what it's
okay.
called, where you like, you
Like
know,
a slow
really,
burn?
where you really analyze kind of everything of what the bird's doing and appreciate the habits and all that.
You have questions on the chat.
Oh. Somebody said maybe a joint Badgerland birding Lake County Audubon YouTube video in the future. What else do we have? Someone said since Wisconsin borders Minnesota, is there some place that a Minnesotan, particularly from the Twin Cities, can easily visit for birding in Wisconsin?
Correct.
That is not too difficult to walk. Cracks Meadows is a good one. So yeah, I don't know. I know there have been some birds that show up on the border and people from Minnesota and Wisconsin can see them hanging out on the Mississippi. I think there was a brown booby where that was going on with too.
I think that was in the cross area, wasn't it?
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cracks would be a good one to go to.
Could also make the trip down to Wyalusing too. I mean, that's a farther drive, but it's at least west, so that would help.
Any other questions?